All right. Thank you, Frank. And thanks, guys, for using a picture that makes me look a lot younger. Really am. Appreciate that too. So, and then that's the. There we go. Okay, so. So $127.2 billion. That's a really big number. And it's actually like 84 point type, but it's really a big number in dollars as well. So I knew I was going to be speaking after lunch. So I figured I had to do something to get people's attention and get you woken up. Now, I thought about lighting my hair on fire, but then the sprinklers would go off and everybody get wet and it would really put a damper on things. So $127.2 billion. That is what the state is going to spend on education next year, according to the governor's May revise. $127.2 billion. So I am, as Frank said, the Director of Research, Transparent California. We are the largest public database of compensation, I believe, in the US for a state, and certainly in the state of California. We gather about 2 million records a year for public agency compensation. So every public agency in the state, whether it's a city, county, school district, local dog catching district, animal control and sewers and whatever it is. There's 4,600 districts in California. We collect over 3,000 of them usually annually. We have over 38 million records online right now at transparentcalifornia.com. So if you ever see any of your public employees talking about, you know, how they can't afford to do this, that, or the other thing, go look them up, find out. In private life, as Frank had mentioned, I've been a K-12 activist for quite some time. I was the first representative on Oceanside Unified's parent LCAP committee, parent representative on the LCAP budget committee when the LCAP first happened. I was also the leader of their parent advisory committee for several years, co-leader of that. I ran for school board in 2020, unfortunately lost. I helped the state design the California school dashboard. In case you've ever seen that, I was part of the team that vetted the designs on those things, which didn't turn out well. I once sat on a panel in Sacramento discussing parent involvement in education. So I've been doing this for a while. In private life, I can tell you also, I'm a co-founder of the Parent Association. I don't know if everybody's heard of that. We were part of the effort to get schools reopened. I helped found that organization with a group of great people. And lastly, too, school choice. I was the San Diego County Chair for school choice. So again, improving schools is kind of the theme here, right? So back to $127.2 billion. When I look at a number like that, the first thing I think of is, what are we doing to improve education with that money? I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with the money, but my feeling is that we're supposed to be spending it to improve education. So let's take a look at that a little bit here. With 38 million records online, you know, we have a lot of data to look at. But as you can see from the graphs here, education isn't really improving. This is English, this is math. Those numbers are not going up, they're going down. So we need to do something about that. The trend is not getting better, but getting worse. Now, if we take a look at how funding per student is going, whoops. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. So how is school funding distributed? That's what we need to look at first, since that's what we're talking about here. So school funding is distributed in a couple different ways. It started out with the Serrano decision in the Supreme Court in 1971. The Supreme Court decided that funding by property taxes was inequitable because higher, more affluent neighborhoods had better schools because they could afford better schools. And they decided that was not good. So they decided to distribute the funds in a different way that was more equitable. Most districts were then getting most of their funding from the state. There still are basic aid districts as well. Basic aid means that they get all their funding from local property taxes. It's about 5% of the districts in the state, so it's not significant. After the Serrano decision, there was Prop 98 in 1988, which then allocated 40% of the general fund to education. That was kind of a big boost for education at the time. Then came Proposition 30. So Prop 98 wasn't enough money. We needed more money for education. So Prop 30 happened. We're raising taxes temporarily, which I put in quotes. Thank you. So we're raising taxes temporarily, again, to improve education. That's, of course, what we're always told when we're raising taxes. Because we all know that the only thing holding us back from having an excellent education for all kids in California is funding, right? That's the only thing. Well, there was one more thing. What they wanted was local control. So they got more money. Now they wanted the control to spend it however they want. That's what happened with the local control funding formula in 2013, the LCFF. They decided they wanted local control and they got it. Absolutely. I agree with that. I think that giving the same amount of money to Death Valley Unified for snow removal that they give to Mammoth Unified is ridiculous. Local control is kind of a good thing. So they did away with what they called categoricals. Before that, they had the categorical system where there were over 50 categories that they assigned education funding to. And then they had this big, massive system for tracking what school district got and what they did with it and all that stuff. Bam, gone. LCFF, block funding, you get a lump of money. Basically, you do what you want with it. There's still strings, but they're much, much smaller. So they lobbied extensively and they got it. They now had everything they wanted. More money, local control. So after that, we immediately entered a long and uninterrupted period of incredible growth in education to the point where California is now #1 in the country.
Oh, right.
Oh, sorry, I was reading from a science fiction book. That was a mistake. In reality, as we saw earlier, California is far from #1. California is I think it was number 38 that Frank showed in his presentation. So what did happen? Revenue certainly went up. This is revenue per student right now, funding per student. That I think is indisputably up. So when your local district tells you that education funding has been cut, they're not actually paying attention to the details from the California Department of Education. They must be paying attention to something else. I'm not quite sure what. So they went from they were funding students at $9,600 per student in 2012 to over $20,000 per student in 2021 and 22. That's a huge increase. That increase is about 107%, works out to about 8.4% per year. And next year, oops, it went off the graph. $22,000 per student. We're now off my graph. I have to redo my graph just because of the state. So during that time, inflation, 2.6% per year. So school funding has been rising at a rate that is over 3 times the rate of inflation. 3 times. How many here would like to have their paycheck rise at 3 times the rate of inflation? You know, if you didn't raise your hand, you're an idiot. But, so I can tell you that if that happened to me, I wouldn't be crying poor. That's for sure. So with that, the average class size is 26.31 per the CDE. That means each class is funded with over $525,000 per classroom. Now, you would think that we would be able to provide a pretty good education for $500,000 a classroom. But to the school districts, that's $500,000 is chump change. To me, it's a nice chunk of change, but to them, it's not enough. That's what we hear from the school districts. When discussing their miserable failure to educate our kids, what we hear is endless complaints about lack of funding from the state. I hear it from my school district all the time, usually around budget time. We could do this if we didn't get enough funding, or if we got more funding from the state, of course. That's just state funding, what I was talking about. There's federal funding too. Federal funding is usually about 10 or 15% of the total funding for education. There's still some local funding. There's the basic aid districts, there's parcel taxes, there's some things that happen locally that you see as well. And then, of course, the lottery. I get asked all the time, wasn't the lottery supposed to fix all this? Like, the lottery is 1%, 1% of the funding. So any parent that ever asks you, what about the lottery? It's minuscule. It's a rounding error in school budgets. How about bonds? bonds are not on here. Bonds are a whole different thing. Bonds are designed to fund facilities and capital improvements. Bonds are huge though. The last data I could find is that there are $113 billion worth of bond funds outstanding in the state. That was as of 2018. I haven't been able to find numbers newer than that. Right now, it's probably a larger number, I would assume. So that's huge. So the main thing they do though, is they allow districts to fund things that then remove them from what they need to spend in the general fund. So instead of paying, $1 million for iPads out of the general fund, they buy it out of bond funds. What that does is that frees up general funds to pay to themselves, higher pay and benefits for themselves. It's an awesome deal. So unlike private companies, if I were to borrow money to build a facility, I would have to pay for it out of my general fund income. But when they take bonds, you pay for it out of your property taxes. But yet when people talk about school funding in California, they never talk about that. They just look at that LCFF number. They don't talk about the couple $1,000s a year that we all pay in property taxes for their bond issues. It's a shell game, basically. So going through the details of how bonds work would require an entire seminar in itself, and it would hurt my head. So I don't want to do that. We need to find somebody or get some aspirin or something. If bonds are your thing, certainly volunteer. Be on your district's bond committee. Go for it. It's not my thing. I've never volunteered for the bond committee because, again, it makes my head hurt. So I don't do that. So meanwhile, revenue is rising at tremendous rates, but districts don't have enough money. So you can see here, this is revenue, this is performance. And they're not going in the same direction. It's one of the only businesses where you can make more money for failing. So where is all this money going? I mean, is there a couch somewhere that has billions of dollars in the cushions? Is there just something stashed somewhere? We hear a lot about mismanagement, waste, and fraud, the mismanagement of COVID funds, DEI spending, all this stuff is big news recently. But none of that spending has anything to do with educating kids, of course. So it's a good idea to keep track of it. But I can tell you, a union leader once told me, they told me this, maybe it's a common term and I've never heard it, but they call it budget dust. When you look at $127 billion and then you talk about DEI spending, say, it's an important thing. Everybody should keep an eye on it and everything else, but you would not see it on this graph if it was graphed. So the big numbers are what I think you really have to look at. In K-12 education, districts typically route about 87% of their funding to pay and benefits for themselves. 87%. So the entire rest of what you see, the janitors, the lawn groundskeepers, all that stuff is about 13% of the money that they get. It's a very small amount. Proposition 30 funds are a great example of that. The sales pitch was taxes to improve education, right? That's what we all voted ourselves for. In reality, in 2015, Superintendent Tom Torlaxon decided that they were allowed to take funds that were designed to help underserved kids and instead fund across the board pay increases for adults. That's what is important to them. So let's take a look at where that money has gone. We're going to use pay data collected by Transparent California, me and my crew. And this is directly taken from the pay records of the districts. Whenever anybody says, oh, I don't know where it can't be right, where does it come from? It's a legal public records request taken directly from the pay records of the districts. Either the districts are lying to us and it's illegal, or it is correct. So that's what we say when we talk about that. The latest complete data set is a little bit behind because the state's rules, we can't collect 2022 until the middle of 2023, which is right now. So we have the most complete data from 2021, so that's what I'm going to use. And the reason I mention that is because we've seen huge bonus increases with COVID funds and the revenue bump last year. It's in the news all the time. So this is actually a lower number than you would really see if we were looking at 2022 data. This is total compensation by labor group. What we see here, this is the administrators. This is the teachers, certificated group, technically, which is not all teachers, but mostly teachers. In 2021, the administrative group, total median compensation It's $169,000 per year. Median means half. That means half of the administrators made more than $169,000 a year. So that half includes the superintendent of the Ontario Montclair School District. I don't know if anybody here is from that area, but if you are, you may know the name James Hammond. Mr. Hammond's district has 83% of his kids on free lunch. Families are on free lunch. That's a qualification of $36,000 a year for a family of 4. 83% of their families qualify for free lunch. Mr. Hammond paid himself total compensation of almost $744,000. He's the highest paid superintendent in the state of California. So I'm sure he's worth it. Nice work if you can get it, right? So did you also know that an administrator like Mr. Hammond and like every school administrator gets what they call a Me Too raise when they negotiate a raise for labor groups? So if they approve a raise for lunch staff that makes $25,000 a year, and they say, gee, this is great, I'm going to give those guys 10%, which is awesome. I really appreciate the lunch staff. They get 10% too. It is one of the most corrupt things there is in schools, because I used to run a national organization. I had managers who worked for me. I can tell you that if I found out one of my managers had worked out a deal where the raise they gave to an employee was the same percentage they were going to give to themselves, they'd be fired. But in schools, that's just normal, right? And they don't have to work for it. They don't have to ask for it. They don't have to improve education for it. They just get it. There's nothing to it. Not something that would happen in private industry. So certificated employees, let's take a look at that. That's this line right here. Median total compensation of a certificated employee was $125,000 a year. Now, I know that's at odds with the myth and perception that teachers are a poorly paid group. I know that not every teacher makes that much. Certainly, there are teachers at the starting rate, certainly, that don't make as much money as that. But that is the median. Half make more. That's how it is. That's data. For 2001, we have records on over 250,000 certificated employees. 196,555 of those have total compensation over $100,000 a year. Again, that doesn't mean they all make that kind of money. Unfortunately, union-defined rules tend to underpay starting teachers. Those are salary schedules that are negotiated by the union. When they say my district doesn't pay starting teachers enough, what they mean is we didn't put a high enough number on that salary schedule when we negotiated that increase. They could easily do that. If you went to the district with a salary schedule that cost $1 million a year, the district doesn't care how you split it up. They don't care, if it's high or low. As a matter of fact, they would like low starting teachers to get paid more. It would make hiring them easier. But so it's not the district saying you can't pay starting teachers more, it's the union. So, meanwhile, Linda Smith, a quote, regular teacher in San Diego Unified, total pay and benefits $404,667 last year. So whether we're paying $404,000 or $125K, neither one are what I think most people would call poorly paid. And neither one is a pay rate that I think requires the purchase of a new can opener so you can open that can of cat food for dinner. I just don't think it's necessary. California is an expensive state to live in. I understand that $125,000 a year doesn't go as far in California as it goes everywhere else. It's not a huge number. No one's saying teachers are getting rich, that's for sure. But on the other hand, if you look at US Census Bureau data, the median California resident with comparable education, meaning if they come out of college with the same education that the average teacher comes out with, makes $88,000 a year, which is about $30,000 less than a teacher makes on median. So when they tell you, as I hear often, that teachers feel that they should make money comparable to equivalently educated residents, I think, are you really asking for a pay cut? Yeah, that can't be what you're asking for. I must be missing something here. I wouldn't want to give them a pay cut. Absolutely not. That's not what I would advocate by any degree. Since Prop 30 was passed, over $31 billion extra has been collected in tax money to, quote, improve education.
Could you tell us what the seniority is of Linda Smith?
She's probably very senior, I would imagine. I mean, as you go up the pay scale, it rises exponentially kind of in most things. But before we get into the questions, we'll have time for that later. But remember that ruling that the state superintendent that Prop 30 funds could be used for raises. So as I said, $31 billion we've collected extra since Prop 30 was passed. Anybody want to guess how much money has gone into additional pay and benefits for employees since Prop 30 was passed? $31 billion. Imagine that, you know. So what have we gotten for that? What have we gotten for that? Well, administrator pay has gone up, certificated pay has gone up, performance, maybe not. So we're not really getting anything for that. You know what the answer is. So don't get me wrong. I love our teachers. I mean, people hear me talk and that you hate teachers. You think teachers' pay should be cut. No, teachers' pay should not be cut. Teachers deserve the normal increases that they get through their salary schedule. That's what and they're wonderful people. They work hard. I love our teachers. Absolutely. The question though, is that the education funds are limited. There's only a certain amount of funds out there. And if you decide that you need to give administrators and teachers more, that cuts from our kids. There's no other way around it. You know, by doing that, you're cutting from our kids. So you need to justify that. In a private business, if I said, I want to give Mary a raise because I like her and she's a great person, my CEO would say, well, yeah, but can you show me what she would make if she was working somewhere else? You know, they wouldn't say, oh yeah, she's a great person. You know, we're going to cut from our advertising budget to support Mary because she's a great person. Instead, he would say, well, you know, that job pays pretty much the same elsewhere. So, you know, if she's unhappy, that's sorry, but you know, that's just the way it works. Same thing here. I think when teachers go up for a raise, a bonus raise in their labor negotiations, that's great. They have the right to advocate. But what they need to do is they need to tell us what we're going to cut from our kids to support that. So we've seen a fiscal cliff is ahead. Unless you've lived under a rock, you know this is happening. Huge declines in state revenue, declines in enrollment. We're going to have a fiscal cliff ahead of us. There are going to be cuts that are going to be made. You are going to see this from your school districts. Every school district in the state pretty much is going to be talking to you about what they need to cut. They need to cut from your kids, your kids' education. That's what they're going to cut from, period. So as our kids are falling off this cliff, can we expect our districts to be telling us the real reason why this is happening? Which is the fact that they all gave themselves huge raises last year. And those raises are the gift they keep on giving because they keep adding up and adding up and adding up as you go. I don't think they're going to tell us that. Now, you would think that school board members would be intently interested in knowing this. They'd love to know these numbers and present them to the public. I mean, can you imagine during a labor negotiation if a school board member stood up and said, like San Diego Unified recently, median total comp of a San Diego Unified teacher is $138,000 a year. None of those school board members stood up during the negotiation and said, we're talking about giving people who make $138,000 a year more money and taking that from our kids because they're running a deficit. So they're going to have to take it from somewhere. None of them said that. This is a compensation analysis that I do. This is San Diego Unified, isn't it? Yeah. So I actually proactively send this to school boards when I find out, to all the board members, when I find out that they're negotiating an agreement, I send this to them and I say, if you'd really like to know what your teachers are making, your administrators are making, I'd be happy to sit down and talk to you about it. No problem. Not one single one of them ever. Well, I've had a couple of school board members come back to me and ask a few questions, but I've never seen them mention this in a negotiation. You know, not as if like if you were negotiating with a private employee and they said, I want $200,000 to do this job, the very first thing you might say is, well, the comparable pay for that job in the area is 125, so no. You know, but we don't see that happening. And the reason for that is the Me Too raise. Guess what? The negotiators are going to make more money than, in this case, in San Diego Unified, the negotiating team on the district side made $283,000 extra because they said yes to San Diego Unified's demand. The negotiating team on the teacher side, they only made an extra 200,000. So that the district side negotiators made more money by saying yes for themselves than the negotiators on the teacher side. So I've sat in many of these board meetings. No one ever explains to parents what they're going to cut. No one ever says, you know, okay, yes, we really believe the plight of our teachers is such that we need to, you know, increase pay. It's the great thing to do. And there may be situations I've looked at. I think West Contra Costa recently negotiated. I looked at their pay, and their teachers do deserve a raise. They're being underpaid. You know, it's not always, you know, they're making too much money. I mean, it just depends on the district and what their pay scale is. So I've sat in these board meetings. No one ever explains it. No one says what they're going to cut. But meanwhile, they're more than happy to hold our kids hostage. You know, they will hold our kids, the unions will hold our kids hostage for those pay raises. Now, I call that taking candy from babies just because you can. Now, normally that's considered pretty reprehensible. You know, if anybody here walked up to a baby in a carriage and ripped the sucker out of their mouth, I think we'd all beat them to within an inch of their lives. I don't think even Vladimir Putin would take candy from babies. But in our society, apparently that's okay if you're a union member. So take candy from baby if you like. So why don't our board members stand up at these meetings, tell the public what their union administrators are currently making, tell them what they're going to cut from their budget to fund it, and then ask what the parents think. You know, the ultimate decision is to represent the views of the parents. So you want to find out what they think, right? So give them the real facts and then find out what they think. If they think, yeah, you know, San Diego Unified certificated members making $138,000 is more important than cutting $63 million from our kids. If they decide that, then that's cool. I'm fine with that. That's democracy. Why don't parents stand up at the podium and read from Transparent California? We've done this in Oceanside, I can tell you. You know, some of the people are here who've done it. You stand up at the podium, we each take 5, and we say, okay, here's what you guys are making. This is the truth. You know, I mean, that's just the facts from their own pay records. You can do that. We often hear the argument that spending more on pay is spending on education. And yes, spending on pay is education. That's, you got to have teachers. You got to have administration. You got to have support staff. You can't run a school without them. It is. The question mark, though, is spending more on education getting us what we want? We're not. It's not. I think it's really incumbent on those boards to take a hard look at when they're in negotiations, to take a hard look at their performance and how much their people are making and make a decision. Do we want to put it into things that improve education, or do we want to put it into the bank accounts of adults? To be a little bit more topical. So we recently saw Newsom visiting a school district, fining them 1.5, I guess he didn't visit, he just fined them $1.5 million because he didn't like their curriculum. We saw Tony Thurmond fly all the way down to Southern California, take a valuable day of his time to threaten a school board for representing the interests of parents with their kids. Now, do you think Gavin Newsom has ever shown up at the board of LA Unified to ask them why they spent $20 billion last year and only 28% of their kids are proficient in math? I don't think so. Do you think Tony Thurmond has ever flown down to San Diego Unified and said, hey, instead of giving your kids, your adults a $63 million pay raise, maybe we should increase the performance of our education so that half our kids aren't failing at English and math? He doesn't do that. We do, it's pretty clear. Top management in our education industry really doesn't care about actual education, at least not when it interferes with their political goals. Yeah, he is. So the solution to this, of course, yeah, the solution is school choice. We know that. You know, if James Hammond and Linda Smith both had this to think, okay, I really need to improve education. Otherwise, my parents are going to leave and the money that goes into my paycheck is going to go with them. They might think twice about that. They might show up at the podium themselves to advocate that their school district do something. But they don't, because we don't have school choice. So they have a monopoly. They don't have to do that. It's inevitable. It'll happen at some point. So what can you do? Here's the call to action. Go to school board meetings. You've heard this before. There is no way you can really know what's going on in your school district without going to a school board meeting. You can read everything that gets published, you can do all that, but unless you actually watch the school board meeting, you don't know what your school board members are doing. In Oceanside Unified, we had 2 Republican, quote, Republican school board members. They vote 5-0 with the union every single time. You would not know that if you didn't go to a school board meeting. I've stood with hundreds of parents, many of you, at these things that involve curriculum issues, parent involvement with their kids, pornographic books in school libraries, et cetera, et cetera. That's all great. It's awesome to see that kind of activity. And I love to be a part of those groups. I'm really happy. But all of that is nothing compared to how the school spends your money. If you went up there and you questioned how they're spending their money, they wouldn't have money to spend on DEI programs. You know, they wouldn't have money to stock the libraries with pornographic books. You know, the money is where it all comes from. So we need to pay attention to the money. We need to go to those boring school board meetings where they don't talk about exciting things like pornography and books. Instead, they talk about boring things like taking $63 million away from the education of our kids. The San Diego Unified Board, by the way, had 75 seconds of discussion in their meeting before doing that. No board member even just questioned it. It was just, mostly they congratulated themselves. Gee, didn't we do an awesome job? So go to board meetings. Support board candidates that support you, kind of duh. But I think that if you don't understand which of your board members are actually supporting issues that are important to parents and kids, you're not doing your due diligence. You know, you need to watch at least enough of the meetings to know, you know, which board members before you vote, and candidates as well. You know, don't just read the mailer because, you know, no one's going to say, yeah, I hate parents in the mailer. That's not going to happen. So, and hold them accountable by voting for them, by working for the candidates that support you, by doing all the things that we should be doing. So Joe Biden, who I don't quote often, has a quote that I think is really appropriate. He said, "Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I will tell you what you value." In other words, you know, when your spouse tells you, we don't have enough money to make the mortgage because we're just not, you know, we don't have enough money, and you look in the checkbook and he wrote a check for the Padres box seats last week, you can say, well, I know what you value, dear, you know, and it's not the mortgage. Same thing with our schools. Look at their budget. That'll tell you what they value. If they value paying benefits for themselves, which is what you'll actually find, that's kind of interesting. Let them know you want our money spent on education and math, English, science, history, the things that we want our kids to learn. That's what you want your money spent on. Of course, support efforts for transparency and accountability. There's a number of groups here that do that. Of course, we do too. You can sign up for our blog. You can sponsor an agency. I can tell you that we are a very shoestring effort and we can't collect all districts simultaneously. There's 4,600 of them, and the collection team is me and a couple interns. And I can tell you districts are not sometimes happy when they get our request. they don't, you know, they don't like telling us what their superintendent makes. So if you click sponsor, it's 25 bucks and that prioritizes. So if you have a district and you're wondering like, when is the pay data going to show up on Transparent California, click sponsor, pay 25 bucks. That puts it at the top of my queue to go out and get it. And by the way, just so you know, so I get people who say, well, how much do you make? You publish our data. How much do you make? Last year, my W-9 from Transparent California was $8,990. So this is very much a labor law. Make public records requests. Last one, make public records requests. You can do it. We have instructions on the website. It's not that complicated. PRA is very simple. If you run into the janitor of your school district at Albertsons looking at green peppers and you say, I would like a copy of the superintendent's contract, that's a PRA. It's not a very good one because, you know, he's not going to be able to find it for you and you have no record, but it's very simple. It's much simpler than people think it is. So, and if you're a school board member, even just a parent, and you want a copy of that compensation summary that you saw earlier, send me an email. I'd be happy to put it together and send it to you. So just send me an email. I'll send you it back. So thank you very much. Thanks, Frank.
Questions? Oh, here.
Todd,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
great presentation. You are collecting fabulous stuff. Is
Yeah.
there a difference between what you're publicizing and what Open the Books is publicizing? Are you doing different things? And the second thing is, could you say something about the pension overhang for the teachers? Here, there's just no money compared to what's owed.
Sure, yeah. So open the books. I've talked to Andre a few times, and their number is not as complete as ours. But basically, I think they piggyback on our request. I think they wait and see it on our site, and then they make a request because all they have to do is ask for, give me the same data you gave them, because it's then an existing document. So we do all the kind of hard work for them, and then they collect it, which is great. I don't really care. You know, it's more the better. As far as the pension overhang, of course, we know that the pension system is tremendously underfunded. I don't know what the current number is. Last year it was like 63%. They were funded to pay 63% of their projected pensions, which means that when we get to that point, teachers are going to take a 63% haircut in their pension payments, or they're going to have to vote higher taxes on ourselves to fund the difference. So that's serious. I mean, if I were a teacher, I would be putting money into my 503B right now, because I don't know that the pension you're being promised is going to be there. Right now, amazingly enough, so teachers get 17% more money in their contribution, their district's contribution to their pension than private employees get in their 401k match. The total contribution is 27%. Average private employee gets 10%. That means a teacher gets 17% more. On a median compensation of $100,000, that's $17,000 a year that they get that we don't get. $17,000 a year, if you put it into a 401k, you put it into the average investment, that's almost $3 million. So when a teacher says, well, don't tell me about total compensation, that's not money I can take home to the bank, you can tell them, hey, I'm 63 right now. If you got $3 million to give to me, I won't tell you about that. That'd be fine. But I don't have it, you do. So yeah, it's a very serious thing.
So Todd,
Yes.
can you ask if there are any school board members in the audience and if they'll stand up?
Well, I don't want to, I mean, if
I'd
any
like to
school
know
board
who the
members would
school
like
board
to-
Members are.
yeah, I mean, if any school board members would like to stand up so we can say hi, we'd be happy to, but thank you very much. Awesome to see you. Awesome to see you all here. Thank you very much for showing up. All right. Oh, Scott.
Todd, I hate to have to phrase the question this way, but have you ever seen any school board in the state effectively use this data to convince their school district to, measure teacher effectiveness, or not necessarily give an automatic raise every year when the COLA comes out, anything like that? What successful strategy have you seen a school district use with this data?
I have never seen a school board district use. I don't know if Mary has seen something,
One last question.
Okay. Yeah, Mary is saying that they looked at their superintendent based on the data. So certainly then it has been used.
Reduce the salary by $48,000.
Yeah, reduce the salary by $48,000 a year. So certainly it has been used. I would love to see it used far more extensively. So
Go to your graph, the wonderful graph, the 4 lines showing salary going up.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll just ask, so has the ratio between administrators and teachers changed over time? Do you have that breakdown? I mean, I suspect what the answer is.
you can see the difference stays pretty constant. The administrator pay does rise a
But I
little
don't
bit
mean-
faster.
I mean, total administrative staff.
Oh,
versus-
total administrative staff is something people get a burr in their bonnet on. We need to cut administrators. And I would agree with that. I'm sure that there's administrator overhead we don't need. A lot of that's driven by the state, though. A lot of it is state requirements. There's so many requirements and you need people to administer those. So I have empathy for them. But the total burden by administration is 6% of the total budget of the state schools. So even if you assume that you can cut the district and the administrators in half, which I think would be difficult to run a school district with half the administrators, you're not going to make a huge dent. In Oceanside Unified, where I am, if you cut the district in half, the administrators in half, you don't even make enough money to support one single raise given to the certificated group for 1 year. So it's a great idea. I support, paring down administration. But, go ahead. Okay.
Second question is, if I was an administrator, the target on this graph is the green and red lines. Do you see, taking these tests under assault, so we actually don't see that education is failing?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, there's a gap here, and the gap is COVID. And they immediately took that as an excuse to not give tests. We were all on Zoom. There's no reason they couldn't have given the tests. They just chose not to because here's an excuse. So, and we see this change all the time. The only reason this goes back to 2015 and not farther is because about every 5 or 6 years, they change the rules. Because then we don't have a historical record. We can't compare the past to the future. And I think that's deliberate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Frank.
Todd.